Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. So Ukraine War News Update, third part of the 18th of May 2024. It's a Geopolitics video, somewhat shorter one. I don't have too much to go through. It's Saturday after all. So we'll sort of whisk through this, although that's not to say it's not hugely important. So Russia and China are to expand cooperation in artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, and other information and communications technologies. This should be a worry. In fact, the whole trip to China should be a worry for anyone interested in global security, where you've seen Russia and China get closer together. China are essentially giving Russia, I think, the foundation to continue prosecuting the war in Ukraine. I think without China, Russia would be absolutely screwed. And that they are going to cooperate more closely with communications technologies, I think, is a challenge to the West in terms of the information space, in terms of security in general. And the ability for both these nations to undermine Western democratic institutions, elections, processes, so on and so forth. So I think that's a worry. It also, I think, we're starting to see China kind of take sides more openly. We know that they are giving Ukraine assistance with satellite technology, satellite imagery, and information like that, which I think is why we're seeing Russia be more successful with their strikes than they were previously in the war. I think China have an awful lot to answer for with regard to Ukraine, and the US knows this. The US went over to China to speak to them. There's pressure being put on China by the UK, by EU. I think we are seeing the world just starting to take sides a little bit here. Anyway, just to dip into this article, Russia-China to expand cooperation in information communications technology. Expansion is planned in areas such as artificial intelligence, communications, software, Internet of Things, open source code, network and data security, video games, radio frequency, coordination, specialized education, and industry-based scientific research. So this is TASS. So take that with a pinch of salt. Russia and China intend to expand mutually beneficial cooperation between the two countries in the area of information communications technologies, according to a joint statement. Quote, for those purposes, they agreed to expand mutually beneficial cooperation in the area of those aforementioned positions. And quote, expansion is planned in such areas, etc., etc. I mean, it doesn't really tell you any more than you haven't already heard. Radio frequency coordination. So you can throw that one in there as well. Slightly worrying, isn't it? Now, Hungary's latest scandal, so there is another scandal there, reveals that Orbán's foreign ministry has been compromised by an ongoing Russian cyber espionage campaign. They even hacked the encrypted channel, also transmitting confidential NATO and EU material. And this is a problem when you have nations like Hungary in NATO and the EU, is that any information that is passed to Hungary, and it's the same with Slovakia, both in NATO and the EU, and there's been talk, I discussed this week, that Slovakia has been something of an intelligence black hole, because no one wants to share intelligence with them because it's going to end up with in the Kremlin. So here we have Hungary being that vulnerable link, and they will have access to very important NATO and EU information. Just is such a challenge. When MFA, so Minister of Foreign Affairs, Peter Szijjártó, received the Order of Friendship from Sergei Lavrov, awarded by Putin himself. So that's the Hungarian Foreign Minister getting like a Putin-Lavrov seal of approval. He already knew well that his ministry had been completely hacked by Russia. He didn't confront the Russians, but praised Moscow and their great cooperation with Hungary, says Geopolitics, who is Central Europe investigative editor for V-Square Project, so he's a journalist. He continues. The Russian infiltration of Hungary's MFA was fully discovered by the second half of 2021. Nevertheless, Orbán's government continued their pro-Russian policies and hid the cyber espionage from the public. Cyber attacks were still coming in January, internal documents show. So there you go. Hungarian diplomacy has become practically an open book for Moscow through the hacking of the ministry's networks. Russian infiltration remained active before and partly after the invasion of Ukraine during the current EU and NATO crisis summits. Hungary's MFA was hacked in at least 3 times in the last decade under Orban's rule. Already in 2012 to 13, the Hungarian MFA was completely hacked, including the encrypted network transmitting classified material. The second wave of successful RU cyber attacks came in 2016. And in 2012, the so-called Team Spy attack was launched not against Hungarian targets, not just against Hungarian targets, sorry. It was discovered by Hungarian cyber defense officers who, at the time, were among Europe's best. Together with NATO allies, they broke into the hackers' attack infrastructure and countered them. It's important to understand that Hungary is not the main target of these Russian attacks, but the security level of Hungarian public and private infrastructures is simply so poor that it is the easiest to penetrate here, a cyber security expert said. Orban's spectacular pro-Russian turn came in 2014, and soon Hungary's world-class cyber defense team was dismissed. Their director, Ferenc Frej, claimed that Hungary's cyber defense capabilities were eliminated and that, quote, it was all done under Russian economic pressure. In 2016, spear phishing email attacks infiltrated Hungary's MFA system. Again, the UK shared intelligence with Hungary related to these attacks, which happened during the time when the Czech MFA was also hacked by Russian APT groups. Czechs went public. Hungary kept it secret. Russia hacked the Hungarian MFA's protected foreign network, Vedet Kilugi Haluzet, VKH, the encrypted channel of national and EU NATO confidential material at least twice in 2013 and in recent years. The system's integrity has only temporarily been restored this February. Hungary's compromised VKH network transmits restricted and confidential NATO and EU documents as well. And a former ambassador of the Orban government also added that Hungarian reports transcribing various NATO or EU meetings are also received through this channel. Orban's MFA did not warn its allies on a diplomatic level about these recent serious Russian cyber attacks. However, Hungary's Constitution Protection Office did share information about the Russian cyber espionage in the Club de Bern intelligence sharing forum in autumn 2021. Quote, it's now common knowledge in the European intelligence community that the Russians have hacked the Hungarian foreign ministry and that many Hungarian diplomatic missions have been compromised, said an EU national security official who learned of the attack in January 2022. Of course, all of this is going to stop Europe and NATO wanting to do anything particularly close with Hungary. They are a fully compromised country. It's an absolute shocker why they are still being entertained. But of course, like I've said before, the dilemma for the EU and for NATO is the more you push Hungary away, the more you punish them, the more you send them towards Russia. How do you get them to come back to you? Or is the only solution cutting them out? You know, it's a cancer on you. Do you try and cure that area of your flesh, cure that so it becomes nice flesh again, or do you just cut that stuff out, that cancerous flesh out, and get rid of it, and then try and heal afterwards? Reaction says the source here. After documents surfaced proving that for years Russian hackers have had virtually full access to the entire IT system of Hungary's Foreign Affairs Ministry, the United Opposition has called for the resignation of MFA Peter Szijjártó. Now, yes, that has to happen. I think Peter Magyar, you can bet your bottom dollar the EU is going to be really wanting Peter Magyar to prevail in any future elections here. They need a regime change in Hungary. Orban just has to go. His Fidesz party is indeed a cancer on the democratic landscape of the EU. Right, but problem with Orban is that the Americans, some Americans love him. So I've talked about this before with regard to his influence on American politics, on the Conservative Heritage Foundation. So we have Tucker Carlson that loves Viktor Orban. Tucker Carlson's dad is on the board of directors for the lobbying company who lobbies on behalf of Viktor Orban. So Tucker Carlson is financially linked or familially linked to Viktor Orban. Heritage Foundation is connected to Hungary and Viktor Orban through at least some financial contributions that come from Hungary, directly from the propaganda arm of the Hungarian government through the Bettany Foundation and other elements. And then you can argue through Russia, money is coming from Russia through Hungary to the Heritage Foundation that then goes back, and the Heritage Foundation is responsible for the Project 2025 blueprint for Trump's presidency. So the policy blueprint and the pragmatic processes that need, pragmatically, what those around Trump and Trump need to do as soon as he gets into power. So the Project 2025 is that blueprint that moves towards further autocracy, further dissolution of the separation of church and state principle, for all of these things that I think have been established for so long, that are part of the American fabric. Is going to be done away with by Project 2025. But you've got to understand that comes from a Heritage Foundation, which I think the Heritage Foundation is fundamentally compromised. So, and the problem is that these people who want that, these generally the MAGA Republicans, love Viktor Orban. But then you have a classic tension here because, and this is why these people end up also kind of liking Russia. So they say, you end up saying, oh, okay, we love Orban, we're going to have CPAC, which is a conservative conference, set up in Budapest. I think it's been there twice, and you've had Viktor Orban having the red carpet laid out for him by Trump. You've got this mingling of Hungarian conservatism, which appeals to Christian conservatism, which then appeals to the MAGA Republicans, and you've got this kind of loving that goes on there. And it's really troubling because this is autocracy, democratic backsliding that is being held up by the MAGA Republican right, saying this is what we want to be like. It's like what you want to democratically backslide. You want exactly what you want: control over the media. You want to regulate the media. You want to regulate the judiciary. You want to change the mechanisms of politics and democracy so that you maintain power for longer and longer. This is not what the US should be about. This is against what the founding fathers would want. So, but anyway, you've got that appeal. Here, Ivana Stradner, who I really want to interview, says American conservatives love Hungary's Orban, but ignore the wooing of China. And this is where the dilemma comes in, because Hungary is also beholden to China, right? By like economically and also somewhat ideologically or politically. And those same kind of MAGA Americans are going crazy about China. China's the real enemy, not Russia. Russia's all right. It's China we want to be worried about. It's like, okay, well, if you love Viktor Orban so much, then you do realize that he's in the pocket of the Chinese. And so there's going to be some cognitive dissonance going on here among those kind of American political figures or the electorate that really supports kind of an Orbanism, if you like. So American conservatives had the standing and muscle to force a course correction in Hungary, and the time is now. So actually, if MAGA Republicans went and Trump went, whoa, actually Orban, you suck because you're hanging out too much with China, not because of all the other reasons you suck, because you seem to like that, but that could force a course correction for Hungary. And this is what I think the Hill article that's being referred to talks about here. So the Hill is a marginally right-leaning, fairly politically objective media source. This is a good, responsible media source. And very rightly says American conservatives love Hungary's Orban but ignore his wooing of China. Really worth looking into this. Of course, you can talk about how Trump saw China and the trade wars and the decisions on Huawei, all sorts of stuff going on there. And you say, okay, you can't hold both things. You can't hold your love for Orban and your hate for China. There's some compromise that needs to go on there. Now, I love the US ambassador here saying exactly the right things, and this is really ballsy, so good stuff.
On Russia, basically every way. So instead of diversifying off of Russian energy, Hungary is doubling down on Gazprom. Instead of pushing Russia out of Hungary, Hungary is inviting Russia in the form of Kremlin platforms, including the International Investment Bank, which the United States government under President Biden's leadership recently sanctioned to have it removed from Hungary. In terms of resolutely standing up in the face of Putin's aggression and war of choice in Ukraine, Hungary is instead parroting Vladimir Putin's talking points with respect to a desire for peace. I mean, the official Hungarian position is that they've advocated for the United States and our allies and partners to stop arming and equipping and supporting Ukraine under the theory that stopping our support of Ukraine, as it literally fights for its very existence on its very own soil, would stop Putin. I mean, history shows the reverse is true. It's not a proposal for peace, it's a proposal for capitulation, and that's obviously not the approach of the United States, nor is it the approach of the Transatlantic Alliance.
So the ambassador rightfully calling out Hungary there. I mean, that's really combative rhetoric, and it's absolutely on point. Now, Ivana Stradner, who is an expert in the Balkan area, says this is not good. So talking, going slightly further afield to the Balkans in general. So you're kind of, what have we got? Serbia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Macedonia, Albania, Kosovo, etc., etc. This is not good, even Radio Free Europe. Now, Radio Free Europe, to let you know, is financed by, at least largely, by the US. When we talk about what is the US or what is the EU or what is the UK doing about the information war. Like, we don't have troll farms. What we do have are several pretty decent institutions. One of them is Radio Free Europe, that works to present a pro-democracy view of things, and it works in the information spaces as a media organisation to do that. This was mentioned the other day when I was speaking. Was it on Touchney I was speaking? People in the UK sometimes, depends where you sit on a political spectrum in the UK. The BBC is often slagged off by the right in the BBC for being too liberal, and slagged off by the left in BBC in the UK public for being too right wing. And the reality is it probably sits comfortably in the middle. I would argue the BBC is actually politically vacuous. It reports on politics, but it doesn't give you political opinion. If you go and watch MSNBC or Fox News, you get political opinion from the anchors who will say, so I have heard more times than I care to count, Fox anchors say we need to do this, and by we they mean Republicans. When they talk about Republicans, we need to do this to win the election. Now, you literally cannot have that on the BBC. It is regulated so they can't have that. There's a BBC charter, blah 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 blah. So when they report on politics, they are actually they have to be so neutral that they end up being quite vacuous and not really giving you political opinion, which is great. You get just what has happened rather than what should happen or any kind of nuance there. But and the political shows that they have to have balance and so on and so forth. But interestingly, when there's a really interesting Owen Jones article back from 2014, I think it was, and it's been the same since then, that said people think the BBC is left wing, but you need to look at who's in the positions of political power there. So if you look at all of the political editors on the BBC for years and years, they have all been basically conservative. So Nick Robinson, your Today programme guy, Laura Kunsberg, etc., etc. You look at them all over time. Andrew Neil, big time in there, super conservative. Nick Robinson, the political editor of the BBC, was the head of the Conservative Student Party in Oxford, I think it was University of Oxford. So, they've got a real pedigree of the key people politically in the BBC have always been conservative, and the reason is because they're afraid of being defunded. If Labour get in, they will not defund the BBC. They see it as an institution part of the fabric of the UK, where we as BBC users have to pay a license fee to have the BBC. The right always trying to get rid of it, and because they're always trying to get rid of it, the BBC err slightly to the right in how they do things so that they appease the Conservative Party. Now, Conservatives don't believe that at all, because what they look at in the BBC is when the BBC have black people on shows where there might not normally have been a black person, that kind of equality of opportunity, and they'll have a disabled person in the show or a gay person or whatever, and say, oh, look at these liberals and blah blah blah, and they look at the social side of the BBC and they say therefore they're politically left wing, and they say this is what the BBC is, and they're just a bunch of lefty liberals. That is not the politics of the BBC. That is a reflection of society and trying to get the BBC to represent everyone in society, right? And that's what they do over there. But in terms of the political commentary, that is not what the BBC do. The BBC in political commentary is here, but actually errs to the right. And you can tell this with how they treated Jeremy Corbyn, for example, and they were not nearly as critical. They were very critical of Jeremy Corbyn, the way they presented him, etc., that annoyed the left, and say, hang on, this is not done by, when it comes to Nigel Farage, who's given, he's, as I said the other day, he's 33 times on the flagship program political program Question Time, and people on the left weren't nearly comparable, and so what's going on here? And it's trying to appease the right. Anyway, what I was going to come on to say, all that was a complete sidebar, but what the BBC does really, really well that lots of people don't realise is it has BBC World Service, and the World Service is in so many other countries doing stuff on behalf of really the UK government. We present news right around the world in longwave radio. I remember as an assistant d'anglais in Toulouse in France for a year, sort of working teaching in France. And I used to listen to the football results with my longwave radio, listen to BBC World Service, and it's absolutely fabulous. Well, you imagine that in Africa and all around the world, but also moving much further on from longwave radio into the internet and things like BBC Russia. So BBC Russia is doing an exceptionally good job to present information to Russians in Russian. Concerning the war, totting up with Mediazona, totting up all the loss statistics, concerning the war in Ukraine, etc., etc. So there are elements of what we do around the world, in the West, in Europe, in the US, to try and combat competing narratives and disinformation. The BBC does a really good job of that in ways that you just don't realise are happening. BBC Urdu and all the BBC iterations in Asia that are and the Middle East and so on and so forth that are just operating under the radar for us, and we just look at a TV show on Saturday night and slag it off because it's got too many whatever people in it. And it's like, actually, the BBC are doing a freaking good job, but it's never really advertised as much. As you can see here, I've asked her to pop on there. But anyway, there are. So if we look at this, this is Radio Free Europe, copying a term that has been used by Russia as a pretext for military intervention, seemed pointless at first glance. However, it reflected the main idea of the supporters of the Serbian world to gather all Serbs in one state. So what Radio Free Europe is complaining about at the moment is this kind of ultra-nationalism that is being stoked up in Serbia, that is going to, as Ivana Stradner says, is a pretext to, a new war. Things are heating up in the Balkans, and it is a real worry. And it is not helped by the situation in Hungary, situation in Slovakia, and perhaps even, North Macedonia recently, their elections. We'll see where that goes. Anywho, Russian cargo turnover continues to decline as Putin's looting and obsession with territorial conquest suicides the country. So Russian cargo turnover, Q1 2023, 4.3%, Q1 2024, 3.3%. So Russia's seaports cargo turnover declines. And that, I guess, is a sign of sanctions, is a sign of the precarious economic situation that Russia is in. Now, on that kind of note here, this is fascinating. So Kyrgyz exports from Kyrgyzstan basically to UAE, United Arab Emirates, went from totally nuts, $150 million in December 23 to a still pretty insane $120 million in January 2024. Kyrgyzstan is the hub for re-export of Western goods to Russia. The West should make an example of Kyrgyzstan that'll make re-exports across Central Asia collapse. So there's been an interesting dip in exports. Is that localized for some, is there some other explanation for that? Or is that as a result of the US, the EU and others getting tight on managing exports? But also it's the fact that we complain about so much stuff getting exported to Kyrgyzstan, and we think, well, naturally it goes from Kyrgyzstan to Russia, but actually, arguably, most of that is going from Kyrgyzstan to UAE. So look at this graph and just look at the insane increase in 2023. So this was at a time when, beginning of the war, it was fairly low. Then it started ticking up a little bit, then up and down, and then at one point, obviously, some people realised that Kyrgyzstan was a place to do things, and they sorted out some trade routes that meant that Kyrgyzstan was a place to get stuff, but it was a place to get stuff in order to get it to UAE, and then UAE should be the one that we look at, really. Yes, arguably Kyrgyzstan and other nations to look at their exports to UAE, but also let's look at UAE and what are they doing. We know that UAE are broadly on the side of Russia, have been. They've been one of these nations that have been involved in mediating the prisoner swaps and whatnot. So they are a player in this war, and evidently very much a player in this war in terms of where a lot of these goods are going. All right, finally, just a video here that just annoyed the hell out of me. It's a pro-Russian or a Russian person flying the Russian flag above the Reichstag here on a drone. Flies above the Reichstag, guys, he says. And he punches the air. We fly above the police, guys. And then some guy comes up. He says, what flag is that?
Beautiful.
It's beautiful. Russia. Okay, says the German. Okay, Russia. Brilliant. And that shows you, I think just that little exchange shows you how difficult the information space is in Russia with regard to, or the sympathy, in Germany, the public sympathies for Russia kind of run deep in some places, right? And there are people in Germany who do have sympathies for Russia, given the extent of the historical connections between the two countries. I'm not sure that's still, ultimately rational, but there you go. It's a challenge. All across Europe, there are elements of support for, obviously this guy is just a Russian, I would have thought, in Germany doing that, but there are elements of support for Russia deep inside many countries in Europe. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Sorry about my completely massive sidebar about the BBC, but it's just something that does irritate me when people slag off the BBC and they do it for the wrong reason. They think it's about this, but it's about that, what they're really commenting on. And when it comes to this, actually, it's a very different kettle of fish. When everyone complains about the BBC, they're probably doing something right. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Take care. Speak soon.